All right, we're going to get started. So good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you for attending our webinar this morning on Human Resource Solutions for Recovery and Resilience. I'm Shannon Duncan. I'm the Marketing Assistant at BST. Just so everyone is aware, this webinar will be recorded and posted on social media later today. At the end of the presentation, we'll answer any questions you have, so please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I am going to introduce our panelists now. I would like to thank our panelists for joining today's discussion. We have representatives from ADP, Tangible Development, and BST. Dave Gutman is a district manager for major accounts with ADP. He is responsible for identifying companies that need human resource solutions to improve their return on investment. ADP provides quality service and products for businesses that need help with regulatory compliance, administration, lack of data integration, and employee engagement and retention. Sujata Chaudhry is the founder and CEO of Tangible Development. Sujata combines experience, perspectives, and education, making her a unique trainer and consultant. Tangible Development helps clients at every stage of their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Adam Lawrence is the Chief Talent Officer and Consultant with BST Human Resources. As CTO, Adam is responsible for BST's overall talent experience, leadership effectiveness, talent development and attraction, organizational growth, and operational excellence. Jack McGuiney is a Senior Advisor, also with BST Human Resources. Jack has successfully applied his experience in leadership roles to enable companies to strategically transform organizations to redirect them towards success. As consultants, Jack and Adam work with small to medium-sized organizations to lead or supplement their HR functions. Now I'm going to kick the presentation off to Dave Gutman.
Thanks, Shannon. Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here and help you enjoy hopefully your first cup of coffee of the day, and provide some education, some perspective on what human resources should be focused on during this unique time. I think we can all agree it's a unique time. And my name is Dave Gutman. Shannon, thanks for the introduction. I'm a human capital management consultant. It's a fancy way of saying I work closely with the BST team overall. And one thing we all have in common is we work with mid-sized organizations, help them manage their most important asset, and that's their employees. So thought it would be a wise way to kick things off with this slide, year in review, and what a year it's been, right? It's really enough to make your head spin. Obviously, we're all dealing with things like social distancing and working from home and things of that nature, but we almost forget all the things that have transpired. I mean, the Australian wildfires, I'd almost forgotten all about that and how traumatic that was for many people. The Olympics got postponed for the first time in our history. We had murder hornets, which I don't think even touched us here in upstate New York, but that was something we had to deal with on a global scale. So really just, and oh, by the way, there's a pretty big election coming up in a little less than 2 months. So with all this noise out there and all these events taking place, how do we focus on what's most important? Much easier said than done, but hopefully we can provide some perspective and some things to focus on as we move through the fourth quarter of the year here. So Shannon, next slide when you get a chance. So something that I see a lot when I work with organizations is that struggle to focus on things that are more strategic, and to focus on things that are much more related to your core business, your mission, the reasons that you got into business in the first place. So this, I thought, was a very powerful example of the difference between administrative HR and strategic HR. So many HR executives and practitioners that I work with, when they get up in the morning and they get in their car and they have their morning commute. Most of us don't have a morning commute right now, but wherever that morning routine may take you, in your head, you might be thinking, okay, these are the strategic things that I want to get to today, or I want to get to this week. And many times what happens is at the end of the day, during that ride home, you'd be lucky if you got to any of them because you got distracted or stuck in the weeds with so much administrative things that you hadn't counted on. Employees calling you, knocking on your door about how much sick time they have left, or a mistake on their pay stub, or things like that. So on the left-hand side, the administrative HR, these are the things we have to do because we're in business. We don't get any rewards or any pats on the back for doing these things correctly, but it keeps us out of hot water. And from a compliance standpoint, it keeps the organization protected. If you don't do these things, that's when risk goes through the roof and it can really come back to bite you down the road. The strategic HR, these are the things that we want to do. And I am fond of asking a question when I meet with HR folks for the first time, and I'll say, what's the number one job of HR? And that usually leads to a pause or a few seconds of silence. And I'm quick to say, in my opinion, in my experience, the number one job of HR is to drive the performance of the organization forward. And that usually gets a pretty good reaction. And I will point to this column here, this strategic HR. You know, these are the things that power your business, that you really want to sink your teeth into and focus on and spend the most amount of time on. You know, engaging with your employees and performance reviews and maximizing the productivity of your workforce. Many other things, of course. So, you know, it's difficult, it's challenging to dedicate most of your time to these strategic things and not get stuck in the weeds on the administrative side. So how do we do that? You know, with all these major events that have taken place throughout the year and all the challenges that it's brought to our respective organizations, you know, how do we focus our time on what's most important? Well, you know, the marketplace dictates that you have some options, and I'll walk you through that at a high level. Next slide, please. So first things first, what I always recommend is start with some fundamentals, right? Take a hard look at your organization, get your finger on the pulse of what's happening, and look to uncover where your greatest inefficiencies exist. And the best example of that is, you know, where's my wasted time? You know, maybe if you're a nonprofit organization, maybe there's a lot of time being spent on grant tracking and allocating those grant dollars to specific projects, specific employees. Maybe you've got all kinds of spreadsheets working and it's really a big time sink. Look for any manual or paper processes. That should be a big, bright, red neon sign. Those are things that we want to look to eliminate if possible. And then, you know, if you've taken the step already to invest in some technology, you want to eliminate what I call silos. So something I see way more often than you might think. An organization may have a technology platform for payroll, a separate one for the HR system, a separate one for benefits administration, so on and so forth. And what happens is you've got a lot of these technology platforms, none of them are talking to each other. None of them are integrated. They should be interdependent, but in reality, those systems are independent. And that leads to a lot of inefficiency and a lot of wasted cost. So once you've done that, what I recommend, step two, is to ask. You know, reach out to your trusted advisors. Could be your CPA, could be your HR consultant, maybe your benefits broker, could be your local chamber of commerce. But you know, start to kick the tires a little bit, and you know, get a better sense of what's out there. You know, ask for some guidance. I certainly do that a lot myself, and I find that it's a good exercise. If you do have existing technology providers, reach out to them. If you discover that you have an inefficiency somewhere or a need, ask them if it's a solution they provide. Take it from me, people in my industry, we love to get calls like that. So, you know, certainly worth the time to do that. Once you've completed those two steps, could be time to evaluate. right? Once you've got a flavor for what might be out there, ask to see a demonstration. I'm a tangible learner myself. I need to be able to see things, reach out and touch them. Certainly worth the time to do that, because there are so many HR technology options out there on the marketplace. It's really hard to decipher which ones are right for you. So I'll give you a few examples, just high-level stuff. In the grant tracking world, there are specific technology solutions dedicated to just that. So keep that in mind as you move forward. Perhaps you need a learning management system. There are dozens of different types for all types of organizations, all types of sizes. I just stumbled across one that is specific for the transportation industry. Think truck drivers that are out on the road constantly, need mobile access to an LMS system. If you're in the construction world, certified payrolls, that's a big one. There's, for lack of a better phrase, there's an app for that. Time and attendance tracking. Given the current COVID environment, you might be surprised to hear that in the marketplace, readily available now are touchless time kiosks. So if you're in an organization where employees are clocking in and clocking out, you now have the ability to do that utilizing facial recognition or voice recognition. The employees don't even have to touch the clock. That's out there and readily available. And then one that I just discovered the other day, there's a HR tech provider called Certify. And this is not a plug for them by any means, but I thought it was really cool. They specialize in thermal scanning. So if your employees are coming back to the workplace, returning to the office, and you need those temperature checks, there's a specific HR technology that handles that as well. So the other thing I'll say is, the idea of investing more in HR technology could seem a little daunting, right? I get it. Many organizations right now are just trying to survive and deal with what's right in front of them. But keep in mind, you're in a position of strength because of the time of year. So a lot of this may be a lot more cost effective than you might realize. It's worth asking the questions. It's worth evaluating. It's worth seeing a demo, because in the end, you have the ability, if you get to the point of pricing and talking about cost, you are in a position of strength given the time of year. It's the fourth quarter. And then the last thing I'll touch on is to consider a PEO. For those that are not familiar with what a PEO is, it stands for Professional Employer Organization. And really what that allows an organization to do is focus on your core business, focus on your strategic tasks, driving the performance of the organization forward, and outsource all the rest. Everything from a tax perspective, administrative perspective, put that on the shoulders of the PEO provider. And what that does for an organization, it's really four things: stability, cost containment, reduction of risk, and attracting talent. And I think we can all agree those are four things that are pretty important, and we'd all like to be doing as well as possible. So speaking of attracting talent, our next presenter is someone who's well-versed in that, and someone I've gotten to know pretty well over the last couple of years. Adam Lawrence, I'll kick it over to you.
All right, thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. And when I did see your slide there, murder hornets, I actually hadn't heard of them, and I had to Google them. So if you hadn't had the opportunity to check those out, actually pretty frightening. So again, good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Lawrence, and as Shannon mentioned, I'm BST's chief talent officer, as well as a consultant with HR outsourcing as well. So just to, I would add another event to Dave's year in review slide, and that would really be the decision of when, maybe how, and in really some cases, if to bring back your employees to the office. I'm out there, our commutes on a daily basis, mine's definitely getting much longer now, and it's clear that many organizations have started returning employees back to the office really in at least some capacity. I think as organizations are really all in very different phases of reopening, I also wanted to briefly touch on a few points to consider. And I realize that many of you may already be back, but I think these are some things to that are good to refresh from time to time. And what I call these really my core 5, as I feel these are tips that really should apply to really all businesses. And most important is to remember that whatever plan that you have in place or that you're looking to put in place as you bring employees back, it really should be drafted with that flexibility in mind, because as you all know, guidance information continuously changes. So the first of the core 5 is prepare your building. And these are things like increasing that ventilation in shared spaces, opening windows where possible. Having good ventilation will only become even more important as the weather begins to turn colder and more people are back in the office. The second is controlling access. If you do, hopefully not, have an exposure or a positive case at your company, it'll be really important to know who is in the building and when. It's also important to establish those protocols for safety, health, and temperature checks. Jack's going to talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. And then finally take a look at your vendor and client visitor policies. Every organization's approach, is going to be very different, but it's also very important to make sure you have the right things in place to really ensure the safety of your employees. The next is really kind of creating that social distance. So all in different types of industries and all different types of capacity limits. So it's going to be important to take a look at your particular situation and adjust really where possible to promote that social distancing. And then consider flexible scheduling, alternating days in the office to reduce that capacity. The fourth is reducing touch points and increasing cleaning. So I think, investigating that touchless technology, Dave touched on that a little bit. Look at things like sanitizer stations, automated doors. There's a million products out there right now. And then really just basically ramp up that cleaning protocol. Do extra cleaning and really work with your cleaning company to ensure that they're using those approved kind of disinfectant products. And lastly, which I think this one is probably the most important, is communicate with confidence. It's a great opportunity now to reach out to your employees, solicit some ideas, and really get a pulse of how they're feeling about a return to the office. And you may want to consider developing a survey. A survey is a great approach to soliciting those ideas. If you're already back in the office, which I know a lot of you are, sending out another survey to assess how things are going may also be something to consider. That way you can use that feedback and adjust as you see fit. And once that plan is developed, and even throughout this entire pandemic here, communication is so key. So talking to your employees, training on all the new policies and protocols will all be really important. And again, the plan should just not be kind of static. It should be fluid. Guidance changes, laws, protocols, procedures are changing really on a daily basis. So it's important to take out that plan and make sure it's updated continuously. So switching gears a bit, at the beginning of our time today, again, Dave showed us his year in review slide. And I agree, with Dave, 2020 has definitely been a year filled with so many changes, so many uncertainties, and we have all been really called on to do things that, I never thought that I'd be doing or possible for both not only work, but really in our personal lives as well. There are also, I think, numerous examples where either a company or individuals have kind of accepted the crisis, understood what was going on and say, hey, it is what it is. Maybe they pivoted and then they reimagined really a new and better way of doing things. And I personally think for me, it's really always important to really take some time to sit back and reflect. And I'd like to briefly share a few things that were reimagined during the pandemic that had a positive impact to me. So the first, grocery store delivery. Yes, it obviously it existed before a pandemic, but now it's everywhere, and all the major players as well as other local organizations are offering it. I love it. Takeout cocktails. I don't need to say anything else about that. The third is this is a picture of my kids at our beach in Orleans, Massachusetts. You know, and personally to me, that although stressful at times over the last 6 months or so, to working parents, 3 kids, all under the age of 8, you know, the pandemic definitely helped me to kind of reimagine and absolutely spend more time, but very different time with my family. And I think we already led a very active lifestyle and spend the majority of our time outdoors, but really the pandemic also forced us to spend even more time exploring nature in ways we haven't had the opportunity to. And then finally, yes, that is a shark. I won't say that it was necessarily caused by the pandemic, but it did fulfill one of my lifetime dreams, and I did see a great white from our beach. And again, I like to bring that up as much as possible. So thanks for listening to that. So kind of shifting gears and bringing this back to the workplace. You know, none of us could have imagined how this pandemic has really changed the way we work and we live. The realization that people and our employees are so central to an organization, I think has never been more profound. Now's a great time to really sit back, reflect, think about all those things that went well for you and for your organization, and really what you can do kind of moving forward to reimagine your organization's people priorities to really ensure that you're aligned and you're set up as you're prepared to move forward. So as you begin to reimagine your workplace, I wanted to discuss 4 people priorities that I feel are important to cover. The first is something I call smart work. And I think in a lot of ways, smart work has really already arrived, but really it's going to be kind of the new, I feel it'll be the new standard across many different organizations. So according to a recent Mercer study, 90% of employers say that productivity has stayed the same or really improved with employees working remotely. And 82% of those employees say they will implement flexible working at a greater scale post-COVID. So, moving forward, I think flexibility in a post-COVID era is probably no longer going to be just really an employee benefit or a perk. I think, moving forward, organizations are going to need to be creative, take a look at their jobs, evaluate those jobs, and really start to develop kind of that clear vision of flexible work, and make sure that the flexible work aligns with the business objectives and really the workforce needs. And then I think it's important too to take advantage or take the opportunity to look at multiple modes of flexibility as you look ahead. It's not just about virtual versus kind of in the office, but be creative. Be creative in looking at your roles, and if it can be done without negatively impacting business operations, go for it. Some things you may consider are like a blended approach. So for collaboration purposes, maybe an employee is working 2 days in the office to collaborate with the rest of the team, but then 3 days back remote. Maybe it's an employee who works more hours during a seasonal surge, if you have a seasonal surge, and really the rest of the year is reduced hours. Maybe it's because to fit their personal schedule. So look at things a bit differently, and then also if maybe there's a project that does come up, so looking at hiring a contingent worker or something to take advantage of that and get that project done where you might not need to hire a full-time employee. Another consideration, I think, to really support smart work is take a look at your current technology as well as workplace tools, and make sure that they're really there and they're supporting collaboration and really teaming, which I think is most important. Things like virtual whiteboards, some community message boards, even online collaboration and messaging tools. We've all seen Teams or Slack. Those are all good things to keep the communication running. but it's important to kind of reimagine how you're using those things and even amp up the use of those as we kind of move forward. And I think most important is if you do have remote employees or flexible employees or a blended workforce, really making that transition between what folks are doing on site and the remote work as smooth as possible. So giving them a really cohesive experience and really allowing them to perform seamlessly, whether they're on site or remote. I think that's really important to consider as you kind of reimagine moving forward. My second people priority is called culture matters. And you know, if you look back, the ways that people have worked, things have shifted. Things have shifted dramatically over the past 6+ months, and workers are really being called on to do new things, to have new work duties, to have new processes, do different modes of communication. They're collaborating differently. So, you know, according to a recent survey data, it's been found that having a strong and positive workplace culture has really helped employees adapt to new ways of working and interacting. It's also shown that having a strong culture helps alleviate some of the stress employees are feeling and increases engagement really throughout the organization. I think that, you know, as you look at this, culture matters now more than ever, and how you continue to grow those social connections with and really between your employees, I feel is essential to keeping your company culture alive and well. As we know, you know, employees tend to leave their organizations or their managers, you know, when they no longer have that positive connection. While some of your employees may really still be working remotely, or, you know, and may continue to work remotely for a long period of time, I think it's more important than ever to stay connected with your teams and your colleagues. I'm sure that many of you can relate that employees miss kind of that water cooler talk. They miss those lunches out with colleagues, and even just the basic kind of daily cubicle drive-by. You know, those are things that I certainly miss in this workforce. So how do you recreate those in a new blended workforce? And so, you know, how do we continue to build and I guess maintain and then grow those connections? So to me, kind of recreating that social connectivity in either a virtual or a hybrid setting, you know, that's absolutely tough. We've been going through this for a period of time now, but it's essential. So I recommend don't stop this. And, you know, it's going to be real important to recreate this connectivity, you know, regardless of where people are sitting. So again, a really critical priority as we move forward. It's also really important as you start to hire new employees into the workforce. So taking a look at your current onboarding process is something that you definitely want to consider, and maybe begin by asking some questions of how can you replicate the ad hoc kind of encounters that typically occur in the office? How are you maintaining that team cohesion? You know, when some employees are working remotely and really others are on site, and how do you transfer that knowledge to a new employee? You know, some examples of how organizations are creating that social connectivity, you know, out there now, I've read is, you know, checking in a lot. So conducting frequent check-ins, whether it's on a daily or maybe weekly basis, you know, doing more social things like reimagining those trivia, those game show nights. We've all done all these things, happy hours, birthday parties, taking them up to that next level. If you don't have a mentor program, maybe it's time to look at implementing one of those. And then maybe pairing up employees from different parts of your organization for just a weekly chat or a get to know you session. And then again, utilizing those communication apps, something like a Slack, and maybe not for work purposes, but forming a kind of just a more social fun group out of that. My third people priority is really mind and body wellness. And, you know, the pandemic over the last 6 months absolutely affected everybody. And I feel that that's in some way employee and well-being is more important than ever. And we've all had different, you know, job duties, that have changed. This blurring of our work and life boundaries, of working at home, overload from just being connected 24/7, a loss of social connection, or maybe your workload, it increased or expanded. You know, employees are definitely stressed. And just to show that, a survey that was conducted in late summer by Monster.com showed that 69% of employees have burnout symptoms. And more alarming is that number is up over 20% from results earlier in the summer. Also, since really the pandemic started, employees are working 3 hours longer on average each day. And 41% of employees have reported experiencing new or increased pain in shoulders, backs, or wrists since working remotely. And then everybody's favorite, Zoom fatigue. I have nothing else to say here other than, you know, it's real. We're here today. So what can organizations do to kind of reimagine their workplace focus? You know, what I'd kind of recommend here is take a look at your wellness benefits. Open enrollment season for many people is really right around the corner, and work with a benefit specialist to investigate, you know, some current offerings that would be good for your workforce. It's also important to consider that these are personalized or hybrid solutions, right? So if you're going to remain in a blended environment, making sure that all your things that you're considering are accessible remote and from anywhere. Some examples include maybe some wellness challenges that are built into the workday, some health and fitness webinars, healthy cooking or nutrition classes, personalized mental health care programs. You know, think something like a Headspace or a Lyra Health. Both of those focus on mindfulness and meditation, and for things like stress, for things like anxiety and fitness. And then employee assistance program. If you already have one of these, you know, now's a perfect opportunity to kind of re-educate your employees on the benefits of those. And also another good idea is to provide some training to your managers about, you know, signs to look for if someone is struggling. And I think something else organizations can do is to kind of take a look at the way that your engineering work and creating maybe new structures that make it easy for, you know, your employees to ease some stress, but also to kind of create that work-life balance that seems to be kind of getting away from us in a remote environment. And then some early success has occurred with a couple things. You know, one of these is setting limits on really how late or early meetings or calls can be scheduled. You know, declaring quiet hours. So setting up a no email policy during certain hours, and establishing certain days as no meeting days. I think focusing on that well-being will help your employees to kind of recover faster from what has really been kind of the most stressful and uncertain period in most people's career. And again, the last people priority is it's really all about the talent. So I think one thing that the pandemic has continued to highlight, as I said, is the fact that how important employees are to your organizations, and that it's extremely important to continue to invest in them. A question that I personally ask myself continuously is, how am I ensuring that I am continuing to attract, engage, develop, and really retain a dynamic and diverse workforce? Am I targeting the right talent for my organization? And am I ensuring really an exceptional talent experience, you know, that everyone can experience here? So focusing on your people leaders and those managing people and providing them really with the tools and training they need to be successful managing people in that flexible or blended workforce, I think is really important, and not only important, but really a change for many when they don't have the opportunity to manage someone that's physically in front of them. I think organizations are also going to need to help leaders help their teams prioritize their work and determine the importance of that work. And I think finally, talent attraction. Talent attraction, as Dave mentioned, is going to be one of the extremely important for every single organization to consider. So a few things that you may want to look at is now's a perfect opportunity to kind of revisit, reevaluate your recruitment strategy and understand the gaps. Even if you're not hiring right now, I think it's a good time to take a look at that. And some questions you may want to ask is, where's my organization currently stand from a people perspective? What have we lost? What are the new skills that we need? Can any of our jobs or work be restructured? And, does it need to be done on site? And can we consider contractors or can we outsource some functions? And do we need a recruiting partner to help supplement our talent attraction team? Another thing to consider is if you're not currently hiring, your talent attraction process definitely should not stop. Continue to work on building that talent pipeline and really now's the perfect time to reach out to those quality candidates that may not have been a good fit for your organization, but just keep them warm, see what's going on with them. So once you do start to hire, they're the first people that you call. It's also a perfect time to look at your technology. Make sure you're reviewing solutions that are working for you now, and maybe look at agile solutions that will help you as you move into the years ahead. I think that virtual recruiting has 100% sped up the process as people have more flexibility and are free to kind of hop on that Zoom call during their lunch, maybe after hours or throughout the day, if they're remote. And I think if the more you're perfecting that use of technology now, you'll be better suited as you move forward. And don't forget really about diversity and inclusion. I know that's a priority that could easily get pushed aside when you have an urgent opening. However, it's important to continue to build that productive, engaged workforce and making sure that you're looking for that diverse talent and that you're creating that inclusive culture within your organization. And finally, you still need to deliver that great candidate experience. Highly competitive market, more applicants than normal, and there's always going to be competition for that high quality talent. So if you're not providing that great candidate experience, definitely missing the opportunity. So look at your process, look at your candidate experience and making sure and make any changes and adjustments there. So just to kind of bring this all together and to wrap up, COVID has caused us and will continue to cause new challenges for all of us, to making sure that our employees are safe, to keeping up with those ever-changing information regarding the pandemic, the new laws, the policies, to running our organizations, as well as all the other kind of non-work priorities. It's also important to, really recognize that the pandemic has presented a perfect opportunity, I feel, to kind of sit back, reflect, and reimagine your people priorities in order to help position your organization, for success as you continue to move through that new normal. So. And I would like to thank you for today, and I want to pass it over to our guru here, Jack McGockney. Jack.
Thank you, Adam, and welcome, folks. If you listen intently to Adam and Dave, the kind of the focus that I got was the past and the year in review and then learning from the past and how we move forward with reimagining from a technology perspective, a people perspective, and I know Sujana is going to talk about diversity and inclusion. I'm going to talk about a function of HR that Dave touched on, which is the administrative HR, which is basically risk avoidance. And a little bit about the past several months. We've had laws, regulations, guidance on both state and federal levels. And as of yesterday, there were 61 executive orders issued in New York. These guidelines have impacted all levels of labor and employment law. from wage and hour laws to workers' compensation, obviously to unemployment. We're suggesting to our clients consistency on a case-by-case basis, but be ever so mindful of being able to be flexible with your employees as you move forward. There's an old saying that the good things about the past are that they're past and that we can learn from it. And if I listen to Dave and Adam, we're talking about moving forward. And I'm going to focus on not those 60 executive orders. I'm going to talk about what's happening in the future from an administrative HR perspective. And if I look at administrative HR, kind of boil it down to a particular label, it's risk avoidance. And risk avoidance means making sure that we're in compliance with things moving forward and that we've learned from the past and are able to look forward in how we treat our folks. As I look forward, the thing that's facing employees actually began yesterday is the New York State paid sick and safe leave. It was passed in the budget in March. It took effect yesterday, September 30th. It guarantees at least 40 hours of sick time for employees. And the key points that I'm going to talk about is the leave requirement from a perspective of employer size and the amount of leave that gets provided, and whether that leave is paid or unpaid. If you're an employer of 4 or fewer employees with a net income less than $1 million, you have the requirement to provide at least 40 hours of unpaid leave. If you're 4 or fewer and have net income over $1 million, you are required to provide 40 hours of paid leave. 5 to 99 is also 40 hours of paid leave, and over 100 employees is 56 hours of paid leave. Now, the question that leads to is, okay, how do I track that? Those employers that are manually tracking time at this point may want to consider some of the technology that Dave talked about in terms of being able to track hours worked, because the accrual that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes is set up based on actual hours worked. The use, even though the accrual that I talked about started yesterday to accrue time off to be able to be used January 1st of 2021, the accrual is 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. The use, which is different for a lot of employers in that it creates a different category of the ability to use sick time. The time off is used for either mental, physical illness, injury, treatment of an employee or family member, or diagnosis, care, and treatment of medical issues. The newest part of this is in absence due to work for a family member who is a victim of domestic violence, family offense, sexual offense, stalking, human tracking, to obtain, it's time off to obtain services of a domestic violence provider, meet with an attorney, the police, or other social services, and enroll a child in school for a health and safety issue for the family. Family member is also being broadly defined in that it is, and bear with me, it is employees, child, spouse, domestic partner, sibling, grandchild, grandparent, and the child or parent of an employee's spouse or domestic partner. So it's expanded the definition under most of the laws of family. As I said earlier, the accrual is 1 hour for every 30 hours work that began yesterday. And then there's a carryover, and the carryover, it will allow employees to carry over any unused sick time to the following year. The one caveat is that if the employee terminates employment, there is no payout for it. Again, you're going to find throughout this presentation, I'm probably creating more questions than answers. The reason for that is, even though the law took effect yesterday, New York State Department of Labor has provided no guidance other than the law on how to actually implement this law. So, for example, there's an accrual based up to 40 and a usage cap based on 40 hours, but there's no cap on the accrual. But employee can't get paid out if the employee terminates employment. So how do you handle that? What we're actually suggesting to employers, and again, it's without real actual guidance from the Department of Labor, but we are suggesting to employers that right now, what can you do? Next slide. Thank you. Right now, what can you do? Review your existing policies, leave policies. And in particular, if you have a sick leave policy or a PTO policy, make sure that the eligibility requirements for that policy meet the law, as well as the accrual requirements meet the law. Attendance tracking, Dave talked about it earlier, and I talked about it. Make sure that you have current methods of tracking hours and accounts for the protected leave in that category. Be ready to set up the accruals. Yes, it took effect yesterday, but the usage doesn't start until January 1st. So there's time to adjust the accruals for sick time prior to January 1st. And quite frankly, plan for more absences, because what's going to happen is that employees that are not economically able to take time off will now be able to have the ability to take time off without impacting their pay. One thing I would mention is that we have a list of frequently asked questions that we've already received from clients, and the answers that we've given kind of off the cuff, because again, there's no guidance. But what we're providing to clients is the best practice that we think we can use in terms of compliance with this law. The list of frequently asked questions is on BST's website. It is updated. I believe we updated it as of yesterday. And it talks about the accrual and the carryover and the use and how to change policies to make sure that you're in compliance. Please use that as a resource. Go to BST's website, and those questions will be updated as we get further developments and further guidance from the New York State Department of Labor. As we move forward, again, I'm not going to talk about the past, but as we move forward, there are a number of issues that employers need to think about and when we talk about COVID-19. Educational developments. We've seen outbreaks, we've seen control issues. For example, I believe this morning there was some conversation about developments in Rockland and Kings County and Queens County in New York City metro area. So please monitor those kinds of things and think about, as you develop your plan for reopening and reimagining, how you would react to those kinds of situations. If there is a common theme in Dave's and in Adam's presentation, it's communication. Effectively communicate with your employees to help them understand where you are and how you can help them. If you look at from a control and management of outbreaks perspective, one of the biggest issues is going to be remote learning in schools, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, and a new hybrid remote learning in schools and how that affects your employees. Again, something to think about as you plan to move forward. The developments from the governor, actually got a call yesterday from a client who had an employee who traveled to Colorado when Colorado was off what we call the travel ban, or affectionately the naughty list. While the employee was in Colorado, Colorado got put back on. That employee returned, and the client said, "What do I do?" Unfortunately, because he returned when it was back on the list, that he's in quarantine for 14 days. So it's those kinds of issues that you need to think about. The governor's talked about additional mitigation measures, and quite frankly, there's been no other information other than he's planning those additional mitigation measures, and we'll have to play wait and see. One of the things that I find interesting is there's a little bit of talk about, especially colleges and universities that are having outbreaks. The idea of a containment zone, which was, if we go back, learning from the past again, Westchester County with its initial outbreak, the initial hot zone, and the governor set up containment zones. There's a number of clarifications that have been issued by the Department of Labor and the EEOC. COVID questionnaire. The question is, the EEOC has ruled that an employer can ask daily employees entering the workforce to fill out a questionnaire, and that it does not violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. Also the Department of Labor and under the FECRA and Emergency Family Leave Act has said that if there is a hybrid model in school where there's 3 days on at school and 2 days remote learning, that those 2 days of remote learning, as long as the school district has published that schedule, qualifies under the Emergency Family Medical Leave Act. However, if a parent chooses in-home learning and the school has a hybrid model, they would not be eligible for that leave. The intermittent leave and the COVID questionnaire, assessment and treatment, rapid tests. One of the questions that comes up is who pays for it, and finally vaccines, which is coming at us depending on where you're sitting, quickly or soon after the first of the year. And one of the questions that comes up there is, does the employer have the right to mandate or compel vaccinations? The EEOC has referenced the ADA and OSHA to allow compelling vaccines. But those 4 topics, stay tuned, because 2 of the 4, the COVID questionnaire and the intermittent leave guidance, has already been challenged in the New York Southern District Court, U.S. District Court of Southern New York. So stay tuned. As you can see, as we move forward, we need to think about being flexible and reacting and reimagining, to react and to be available and ready for the best advice that you can get. Right now, the best advice we can give you is to have a plan on how you'll operate, as Adam talked about, reimagining, and as Dave talked about, using technology, incorporate those into the plan, and then document how you'll comply with that plan. And of course, when you run into a situation, use your advisor, whatever that advisor is. If it's a advisor from your payroll company, if it's your labor and employment attorney, or a human resources consultant, who can help you make a consistent approach moving forward. I want to thank you for the time. I'm sure that I've raised some questions, and I want to turn over to Sanjata, who can talk about how we reimagine the workforce moving forward. Sanjata?
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Adam and Dave, for sharing your knowledge. And good morning, everyone, and thanks for sharing your morning with us and allowing us to be a part of it. So I want to talk to you a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it's critical to the resilience and recovery efforts of organizations today and future forward, right? And I think that everything that Adam and Jack and Dave talked about are part of the culture and creating the nimbleness in our organizations to be able to be resilient and to be able to recover from some of the challenges we're experiencing as a workforce, as a communities, and as organizations, right? So a little bit about demographics, just to give you some data. This is pre-COVID data that we're talking about, but I want to talk to you about it first pre-COVID, and I also want to talk to you about what we call the 3 Ps, the pandemic, the protest, and the politics, and how it affects our demographics and how we support workforce and how do we create a diverse, inclusive, and equitable workforce. So if you take a look at the demographics, the baby boomers are continuing to leave the workforce, and especially now more than ever, because with COVID, many are realizing that they don't want to incorporate the risk of being in the workplace and are leaving quicker and taking severance packages and things like that sooner. Lower fertility rates and changing immigration rates in the US. So our workforce, our future workforce, the level of people coming into our world are declining. If you look, there are 88% of the US population has grown through immigrants and immigrant descendants. So what do I mean by that? I mean individuals that are immigrants and then their children. And that would be me, for example. Growth of numbers of women outpaced the growth of numbers in men in the workforce, especially given now. And if you look with COVID, what's happening is there's displacement in families due to stress and challenges and the mental effects of COVID on families and the dynamics, as Adam spoke about, the mental health and mental wellness. And then we also talk about people of color, and will continue to be the larger percentage of the workforce in the future. And if you look by 2024, Hispanics will be at nearly 1/5 of the population, or Latinx. So the demographics are continuously changing in our workforce. With that being said, how do we as organizations, employers, how do we embrace the changes that are occurring in our workforce, and how do we support them from a culture standpoint and a policies and practice standpoint, and a process standpoint when we're hiring, when we're recruiting, and then once we have our employees in our workplace, how do we retain them, and how do we provide an environment that they can thrive in? Next slide, please. So the workforce of the future is older, it's going to be more diverse and more educated. So how do we support it? And so what I'm trying to impress on everyone is that diversity, equity, inclusion in the past has always been sort of a standalone effort in organizations. And it has been something that organizations find that it's critical to have a conversation about, but have never made it a priority. And so given what's happening with the 3 Ps and the change in the demographics of our workforce and the style of our work days now, it's become a critical conversation. Diversity, equity, inclusion can no longer be a standalone. It has to be integrated in your organizational culture, in your organizational policies, in your strategy, in the way you present your organization to the workforce in order to be able to recruit and retain that talent. Even outward facing, how your vendors will partner with you because of your diversity, equity, inclusion policies, and how you attract talent. The first thing millennials and Gen Zs do is go to your websites and and look at you from what are you doing from a corporate social responsibility standpoint? What are you doing to increase diversity in your workforce? How are you working with vendors of diverse population? So it's critical from an employee values proposition as well as a brand proposition, right? So something to consider, that it is no longer a standalone, but it's a criticality to conversation in organizations. Next slide, please. So what I really want to do today with all of you is sort of give you some low-lying fruit that you can kind of go back into your workplace and consider incorporating to start creating change in your organizations from a diversity, equity, inclusion standpoint. So diversity, really, what is diversity? And when we talk about it, we talk about focusing on numbers, right? It's about demographics and who's in the room. And so when we focus about demographics, I'm giving you some strategies maybe to consider in your organization, regardless of what industry you are or size you are, as to how you can support diversity in your organization. So recruitment efforts that focus on recruiting more underrepresented groups. And how can we do that? For example, we work with clients in looking at their job descriptions. And also your job description should have a statement for your commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and hiring diversity, equity, inclusion. And there's certainly a way to do that that is HR compliant and legally compliant. And so it shows that you are asking individuals from various backgrounds, experiences, demographics, race, religion, so on and so forth, you're encouraging them to apply for your positions. Also look at the way you phrase your words and how is it termed your job descriptions. You know, are you putting in terms that skew to more male applicants than female applicants? And there are tools that we use that gender decode your job descriptions. So things like that are very, very low-lying fruit that you can kind of address in your organization. Additive approach to including underrepresented and marginal communities in programs and services. And how do you do that? How do you engage different diverse organizations to help you understand what diverse workforce needs, what do they require, and what are they looking for in your organization? So are you working with chambers such as the Black Chamber of the Capital Region? Are you working with organizations such as NICED who help support placing individuals with disabilities into the workforce? And I think disabilities oftentimes gets overlooked in the demographic profiles of recruitment. And so I like to bring that up also. The other way to really think about how you can create a diverse workforce is rules for representation. And I don't know if, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Rooney Rule. We're big Steeler fans in my family, but and football fans. But the Rooney Rule really is that the NFL had adopted a rule that said that they, if they hired a diverse head coach, that they would get a better position in the draft pick. Now, am I saying that's the way to handle it? Is it right or wrong? It's up to you and your company values and your core vision, mission, and value statement. But really what we're trying to say to organizations is adopting a version of the Rooney Rule, and that's doing a diversity slate, right? And that is creating a policy in your hiring practices and that you must have X percentage of diverse candidates in the interview pool for a position in order to place a position in a person in that position. And so what does that mean? And studies have shown that if you have, for example, you're hiring someone in an HR capacity, whether it be talent recruitment, acquisition, or any of those positions. But if you have, say, you have 5 candidates in the pool for interviewing, if you have one person of a diverse background or a person of color, the tendency to hire that person is less. But if you have 2, the tendency is that there's chances that you may find that that candidate is a fit for your organization. And so statistically, it's shown that too, but it's also representation, right? Are we going back? And then you have to live that model. Organizations say, well, it's very difficult to find diverse pools, when in fact, it's more about how are you casting your net? What are the policies? And are you making a firm commitment to diversity by saying, if we don't have diverse population in our pool of hire, then we need to go back to the drawing board. And it challenges an organization. And I know that it takes time and it takes commitment, but it really does make a difference, because diverse perspectives also have been proven that your innovation goes up, your growth goes up. Those statistics are available to anyone that needs them on the internet or anywhere for that matter, but I'd be happy to share them with you. Gender representation on board legislation, right? California recently has mandated that 50% of your board has to be women. So it's just interesting in that, how are you making a commitment? And again, remember, not every organization can do such trend-setting policies, but it's something to start considering. And then incentive programs for hiring. And how do we do that? Underrepresented populations. How are we incentivizing programs for hiring underrepresented populations? So some possible strategies to think about when you talk about diversity practices. Next slide, please, Shana. So equity practices, right? So equity focuses on policies and practices in your organization. What are we doing to make our policies and practices adaptable and nimble to be able to attract and recruit and retain diverse hires? Evaluation of recruitment, hiring, retention processes to understand inequities. For example, right? I mean, are we looking at things like adding salary ranges to our job descriptions? And are we looking at hiring practices? How are we onboarding? Do we have diversity, equity, inclusion, hiring, training when we do hiring practices and processes and in our inequities? The other thing is equity process advisors. So universities oftentimes, I've heard, use these, and other organizations as well, where they have an individual on their hiring committee to be an equity process advisor. And what does that mean? That means, for example, if you're hiring someone and there was a situation one of my colleagues experienced, and that is that they were looking for a hire in a university setting, and they had an equity process advisor to kind of understand if there are biases in the hiring process. And so this individual really was not there to give an opinion on the candidate, but more on the process. And so they were doing the interview remotely, which really speaks to what's going on in our world today. And the individual was on a teleprompter in the room, and there were 5 interviewers, panel people interviewing the individual. And the individual on the teleprompter came up, and apparently the way they had their laptop positioned was very close to their body. And so they looked very looming over and kind of intimidating in the way that they were presenting. And so at the end of it, one of the hiring team members said, "Oh, well, that individual is very aggressive. I'm not sure they're the fit." And so the equity process advisor said, "Hold on, time out. Where did you come up with the comment of aggressive?" And they said, "Well, did they say something aggressive? Did they use aggressive words? Did they not? Did they answer the question with aggressive tendencies?" And they said, "No, well, they just seemed like they were looming over us." And that is a bias, right? So that's a bias in hiring practices. And that's what an equity process advisor does. And if you have someone on your team who's trained to recognize these things, it could be a definitive way to elevate the way you hire diverse employees, right? Inclusive dress codes are some options also. For example, recently in California as well, they implemented a policy across all organizations that Black people, people of color, could wear braids. And that was just a policy that they adopted across the state, because studies have shown, and I don't know if you know the organization called Perception, who does all these studies on, you know, dress and the way people present, the color of their skin. But Perception discovered that people of color, if they straighten their hair, tended to receive a job interview versus people who wore braids. And so, and oftentimes many organizations, especially law firms and things like that, tend to tell their employees that they cannot wear braids. And so that was not inclusive, because it represents a cultural and just a personal style. So California adopted that. And so you can think about things like that. Or what does it mean to say, we recently worked with an organization and it said professional dress code. Well, what does that mean? Professional dress code is such an ambiguous term, right? What does that mean? And how do you address professional dress code? To one person, professional dress code could mean something to another. So things like that to consider. Chosen name policies, right? Oftentimes, especially this is around people with LGBTQ communities, right? Chosen name could be different from their given name. And so what ends up happening is that when we do hiring and when we have forms we fill out, we expect them to give us their given name versus their chosen name. And oftentimes those names don't match the identity that they identify with and the orientation they are. Comprehensive gender options. And this can be challenging, and I know that because we work very hard with organizations as to how we can support comprehensive gender options. For example, people that are transgender queer who go by they, them, theirs, and are part of your organization would not identify male or female. And so then that affects health policies, right? Or healthcare options and insurance providing. Because if you don't identify, then you can't get the appropriate physicians. For example, a female could not go to a gynecologist obstetrician if they did not identify female. So those are the questions that we have to start talking about, considering how do we approach those in our organizations and how do we respond to them. And then again, flexible work hours. I know many, Jack, Adam, all of you hit on it, about talking about flexible hours, especially women currently going through the pandemic, having the majority of the time, not always, again, please know that men and women equally take care, or they, them, they all take care of their children. But women are disproportionately affected by this. And so flexible hours and policies, for example, and I think Adam, you spoke about it, or maybe even Jack, about how you need to support people who have children at home and hybrid models, flexible hours. And so we do it at our office all the time. We have to live and breathe our mission, vision, and value. So we do a hybrid model where we have our team come in, because I know that we've worked it out such that we recognize which days our team has co-parenting responsibilities and which days our team doesn't. So we have a hybrid model. But then again, we have to be nimble and adjust. And so we do 2 days, 3 days in the office and 2 days not in the office, working remotely. The bottom line is 40 hours of quality work and delivering to our clients. So things to consider for the future as well from an equity standpoint. Next slide, please. And then inclusion. So we talk about diversity, right? Those are the numbers and the demographics. We talk about, so when we talk about diversity, we say who's in the room. When we say equity, we talk about who are we missing and that's not in the room, right? And how do we get to that through policies and practices? And then inclusion is how do we make everyone feel like they belong? And so here's some low-lying things like celebrations of identity, historic-based celebrations, right? The things like Juneteenth and Women's History Month, Pride Month, Black History Month, are all things that we can do. Now, these are all wonderful surface inclusion strategies, but things to consider that we talk about also are, like, for example, shifting your holidays to floating holidays, because not everybody practices the same religion. Not everybody practices the same philosophy or the way, or celebrate the same days. So maybe if we legally have 10 days off, then, holidays, do we shift that for employees? And it's something you have to consider as a business strategy, and does it align with your mission, vision, and value statement as an organization? Processing emotions, are they validated in an organizational culture? Right now, we have a huge uptick, as you can imagine, after the killing of George Floyd and the protests and the politics, especially now, happening in our country, and the vulnerability and the sensitivities that arise with it. I'm trying to adjust my laptop because I see the sun is starting to come into my face here. But really, how do we process? And so what we do now is we've gotten a lot of uptick on racial dialoguing, especially in the workplace. And how do we, as organizations, allow our employees to work through the emotions that are occurring and are heightened in our communities and in our homes, to bring that into the workplace. And how do we navigate that, right? Because you can't separate what's happening in your home and in the communities and in our world from the emotions that we bring into work. And so how do we allow that? And so we've been working with organizations, large health institutions, large financial institutions right now around racial dialoguing and political dialoguing. And how do we provide tools and strategies to our managers and our executives and even our employees to be able to have those conversations which occur respectfully, and accept the differences and to be able to navigate the differences. So there's huge uptake on that, but it also gives the feeling of psychological safety to be able to do that. And it speaks to the culture and the commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. I know, Adam, you spoke about regular group and personal check-ins from a mental health standpoint, as well as from a workplace standpoint to create inclusion, given that we are currently, majority of us are working remotely, or at least doing a hybrid model. No longer are we the standard 8 to 5 day model. So regular check-ins, whether they be team huddles. I mean, I know I do a team huddle with my team at 9 o'clock every other day for an hour, and we have a process involved. In which we do it. We use whiteboards, so on and so forth, all the things that Adam talked about, but are critical to staying connected, because the social component of the workplace has also been affected, and it's critical to make sure that we do the check-ins. Dialogue used as a technique to talk about conflict resolution, and I already spoke about that. And then, and also about the dynamics and impact to underrepresented and marginalized communities. And I think what happens is I think people genuinely recognize that it's critical to understand these differences, but they don't know how. And so how do we provide those tools and those strategies to our employees and to our management, especially because they're the front line, right? The managers are dealing with the front line, and senior leadership oftentimes don't see the experiences the front line is having unless it comes through our manager rank. And so how do we give them the tools to have those dynamics and the conversations around it? So really, next slide, please. And then finally, I'd be remiss in not talking about social justice. And I know this is a very delicate and sensitive topic, and not every organization is ready to make a social justice statement. However, I do have to tell you, after the killing of George Floyd, our phones and our office was exploding because organizations were reaching out to us saying, help us craft a statement. We don't know how to do this. We don't know how to do this work. And really, what we're saying to you is that whatever it is that you place out there, we have the 3 Ps, I talk about the pandemic, the protests, and the politics, but we also have what we call the 3 As in communication, right? And that is acknowledging what's happening and recognizing that it's happening in our world. 2, what action are you ready to take as an organization, which maybe at this moment, we're just not sure what our action is going to be, and accountability. And once we decide on our action, we will let you know who's accountable and how we're going to make those steps occur. But those 3 A's, depending on where you are, you could be a social justice mission-driven organization, or you can be an organization that doesn't have that incorporated into your value statement, but that's fine, but you need to acknowledge. And so, again, cultural accountability in your policies and practices, active practice of dynamics, right, or addressing these dynamics that are occurring in our communities. And for example, Georgetown recently, systemic racism exists in our country. Now, that's a fact. How we address it and how we deal with it as an organization is based, again, on our business strategy and our mission, vision, and value. But Georgetown, for example, recently discovered through research that many of their buildings were built by slaves. And so what they did adopted a policy and practice that stated that any family member and descendant of an individual that helped build these buildings and institutions, the educational institution, would receive free tuition and they called it the Georgetown Reparation Fund for those descendants of the individuals that were wronged from policies and practices of the past. So how do we address those things? And the redistribution of resources, money, and time. And oftentimes this work sometimes may involve us spending a little more on the front end to reap the benefits on the back end, right? And so for example, there are organizations, and we have clients who have made a commitment to aligning with diverse vendors and suppliers as a commitment in their policies and practices to diversity, equity, inclusion. And so what does that mean? Sometimes that diverse vendor might be, whether it's a vendor of disabilities. For example, all of our masks for our company have come from Spectrum Designs. Not that I'm pushing that on you, but just to kind of give you an example, Spectrum Designs created all of our company face masks for safety purposes. Now, Spectrum Designs hires only people with disabilities on the autism spectrum. And so that is our mission, vision, and value. Now, the masks were slightly more expensive. It came at a cost to the organization, but that's our mission, right? So that's what I'm talking to you about, just a simple example. So those are the types of things from a social justice standpoint, and to create a transformative culture that I would be remiss in sharing with you. But overall, what I'm trying to kind of impart on all of you is that diversity, equity, inclusion is no longer an option for a standalone. In whatever level of commitment you need to make in your organization, it's critical that you make it. And I hope that I was able to give you some suggestions that you could take back to your organizations and implement them, whatever size you are or whatever industry you are. Thanks for your time.
Okay, that will conclude our presentation. I am now going to go to the questions. If you have a question and haven't submitted them yet, please use the Q&A function. I do have one question, and I think this is towards Jack. And the question is, does this law apply to seasonal or temporary employees?
The short answer is yes. It also applies to part-time and per diem. The general rule of thumb for employers that we've been suggesting is that if you issue a W-2 for that employee, they're covered by this law. I hope that answered the question.
I checked the chat and the Q&A, and that's all that we have. So with that being said, I would like to thank everybody. Actually, one just came in. Due to my role, I was interrupted several times. By chance, was this oh, never mind. Yes. This is recorded and will be posted on social media later today. So this will conclude our presentation. If you have any questions, please reach out. The numbers are here. And again, this will be posted on social media and our YouTube page. I would like to thank our panelists and everybody who was on the call today. And I hope everyone had a great time with us this morning. And once you exit this, you will get prompted to answer a short survey. We would appreciate if you answer that for your feedback. And I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.